Let me move over to South Dakota, where Democratic Senate candidate has dropped out of the race, clearing the way for independent candidate Brian Bangs to take on Senator Mike Rounds in the fall. Your organization, Independent Veterans of Support of America supports Brian Bangs. What do you expect in this independent versus Republican race?
One of the most exciting races in America.
Live from Detroit to dig in on the implications of this race and so much more. Joining us now in the news center is independent national security and political analyst Paul Rieckhoff here in studio, along with NewsNation contributor Lauren Wright and former Democratic Congressman Conor Lamb. Paul, let me start with you because as Joe was pointing out there, this was a tighter race than expected. It was already expected to be pretty close here. What does that tell you about the odds going into November and really about the Democratic Party and the progressive wing of it?
There's clearly an identity crisis happening within the Republican Party. They're deeply divided. But I think the net here is they're putting forward a candidate that I don't think can win in Michigan. This is the Mamdani of Michigan. And Michigan is not Manhattan.
Mamdani fared better, though, here in New York, even with the odds.
Right, but he only won 51% in Manhattan. So if you think you're going to fare better in Michigan, you're deluded here. I mean, I think this is really a sign of how the partisan primaries are taking both parties further and further to the extremes and further away from the middle where most Americans are. 45% of Americans are independent. In Michigan, it's about 17%. And he's going to have a real hard time reaching them. He's definitely far left of center. And I think it's a misstep on behalf of the party, but it's a reflection of where they are. The extremes have taken over the parties on the right and on the left, and the middle is being left behind.
Yeah, they've got 90 days to figure it out there in Michigan. Conor, let me ask you this. Congresswoman Haley Stevens released a statement offering support for Abdul El-Sayed now in his campaign. Listen to what El-Sayed said about uniting with Stevens today.
So my colleague and friend, Congresswoman Haley Stevens, we shared a great conversation this morning. And I know that it was a bitter end to this very long primary, but I also know that Haley brings the best of herself to her work. She is one of the most committed public servants that you'll ever meet. She loves democracy like I love democracy. And whatever differences that we might have had in the primary, they pale in comparison to what unifies us.
What is it going to take for Democrats to come together in Michigan after this very divisive primary, as Joe is pointing out?
Well, I think it starts with leadership. And so El-Sayed himself is going to have to set a tone that welcomes back Haley Stevens' supporters into his camp. So she's already done her part. She said that she's supporting him over Mike Rogers and everything, but he needs to be the one to signal to these voters that they can have some faith in him and support him. I also think to the degree everyone's saying that, the extremes have taken over the party, you have to remember how close this primary was. It doesn't look to me like anyone took over. It ultimately came down to a very, very small number of votes. So given that, he's going to have to be careful about how he campaigns.
Yeah, Lauren, to that point, I mean, President Trump called El-Sayed's win in Michigan a great news, as Paul was kind of pointing out, for the Republican Party, given that so far the polls don't have him going up against Rogers and winning here. The president went on to call him, of course, a communist. We've heard that before, a loser who hates Jews and Israel in the Truth Social post. How effective will those kind of attacks be? And can El-Sayed's brand of economic populism, from your perspective, does it have a chance in Michigan?
Well, first of all, Donald Trump, that's low-hanging fruit that he is truthing out, or whatever you call his social media platform. The only hope for Republicans right now in this country with such an unpopular president and a lagging economy is the obscenity of the positions of these Democrats that are running in states. And so, yes, it was razor thin. I hear the former congressman. I wish he was still in Congress. But you have ideas that are not tolerant, that are not mainstream, and he's going to cost Democrats their path in Michigan, just like they lost their path in Maine. I mean, putting Hamas and Israel on an equal moral and ethical footing is not a mainstream position. These are extreme positions that Michiganders don't agree with, the majority of Americans don't agree with, and he is going to have a very hard time convincing the 6 million Jewish voters in this country that things are okay, because most of them feel that they're not right now.
This episode of Independent Americans is sponsored by Kalshi. We make predictions every single day. We talk about it on this show: politics, pop culture, the economy, the biggest stories making headlines all across America and around the world. Kalshi, America's #1 prediction market platform, lets you trade those predictions in a live market. If you haven't checked it out, now is the time, especially around politics and the elections. Will Trump buy at least part of Greenland? If you think he'll do that before 2027 and you wager $100, it'll pay out $2,019.24. If you think it's going to be before January 20th, 2029, it's 17%. You can also pick whether or not you think the Republicans or the Democrats are going to win Congress. You can pick who you think the Democratic nominee will be, who the Republican nominee. It would be great to see if there's an independent nominee. There's a lot that you can wager on, but on Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. It's fun. And if you listen to this show, you can stay ahead of the curve. So download the Kalshi app and use the code INDEPENDENT and get up to $500 in bonus credits when you trade 25, which is pretty good. Kalshi, 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 trade on anything. 18 and older, restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Kalshi products are not available in all jurisdictions. Prices, values, and available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see Kalshi.com/regulatory. Independent Americans, now is the time. Check out Kalshi.
Yeah, I'm hearing it's a win for the moment, but certainly still, again, that uphill battle. Conor, DDHQ Chief Elections Analyst Jeffrey Skelly has said that Democrats cannot afford to lose Michigan if they're going to find a path to taking the Senate and having a majority there. How critical will El-Sayed's campaign be toward answering Democrats' question about the electability of progressives going forward?
Oh, I mean, he has made himself the standard bearer on the question whether one of these progressive DSA-aligned candidates can win in a battleground state. It's absolutely right. The Democrats cannot control the Senate without Michigan. So, if he wins, he's going to be able to cast himself as a hero. And if he loses, and I share a lot of the concerns that have been expressed on here today, it's another reminder of what we kind of already know from history, is that the general election voters in these battleground states are kind of in the middle, and these more extreme policy positions can really hurt you when it counts.
Yeah, we've got 90 days to figure out what happens here. Paul, let me move over to South Dakota, where Democratic Senate candidate has dropped out of the race, clearing the way for independent candidate Brian Bangs to take on Senator Mike Rounds in the fall. Your organization, Independent Veterans of America supports Brian Bangs. What do you expect in this independent versus Republican race?
One of the most exciting races in America.
Really?
And it's not the only one. Now, the Democrat has also dropped out in Idaho, so you'll see Todd Achilles head-to-head against incumbent Jim Risch. So this is, I think, a potentially winning strategy if you do want to knock out Republicans. It's not to put up a far leftist who's a replica of Mamdani. It's to put forward an independent veteran who lives in the state, who's dedicated to the state, who's strong on national security, and can bring people together. I think this state will be a test case for an alternate strategy that appeals to moderates, that appeals to independents. And you also may see the same thing in Montana. Seth Bodnar is a Green Beret. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He's running as an independent there. But the Democrat refuses to drop out. She's got no chance. She's raised no money. And right now she's a spoiler. But we could see 3 Senate races that are head-to-head and independent against a Republican. And I think they're going to be 3 of the most exciting Senate races in America.
Yeah, over the last decade, we've seen this independent movement. But to your point there, in this midterm, that seems to be gaining the most momentum it's ever had.
He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow. And it's not cool to believe in school, but if I can say one thing, I've seen the children of the revolution and the good trouble they can bring. He says the red and blue are dead and independent is an attitude. An island in the sea of rhetoric, and I can probably go. He tells me the left and right are dreams for those without a clue. And when you wake, it's time to grow.
Powered by Righteous Media.